session, what we're really going to be thinking about and talking about is, can the past provide us with a useful guide to the future? What does it mean to be post-colonial today? What is the impact of issues such as climate change, migration, economic failure, xenophobia, and even the internet? What is really at stake for us? And what approaches are possible for social change? So please help me in giving an incredibly warm welcome to this individual that has come here from Paris. So Aboubakar Fofana is a Malian-French artist, educator, and self-taught master craftsman of fermented 100% indigo dyeing. Welcome, welcome. So Aboubakar, my dear friend, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Missla.
I want us to begin at the beginning. You know, the Akan notion of Sankofa talks to us and tells us about going back to get wisdom, to go back and get hope.
Yeah.
If we think about in Nigeria, Fela Kuti said, "Who no, go no."
Yeah.
In both of these ideas or notions, what seems most interesting or important is the idea of action. So I'm curious, what led you to act? What compelled you to act, to go back and try to retrieve this lost tradition, lost technology of indigo dyeing that goes back I think you said to me 6,000 to 6,000 BC, yeah?
Yeah.
It's a tradition that here in Nigeria, it's practiced by the Yoruba, by the Dogon in Mali. And I remember you told me that the pharaohs in Egypt actually were buried. When they were buried, the shrouds were actually made out of indigo-dyed cloth. So can you tell us a little bit about what compelled you?
Yeah, it's of course a very long tradition. And of course, when I think indigo, I mostly think at the substance, not the color. And I've been first introduced to indigo as a medicinal plant, as an antiseptic and anti-inflammatory. Because during my childhood, when I was going to visit my grandmother during the vacation, and we was, have some responsibility, like we was a kind of a small shepherd, and we was trained to go to take the animals in the field, and feed them the entire day and come back at night. And most of the time, the adults will commission us to bring back a different plant for a different purpose, and especially my grandmother, who was a herbalist, a healer, who used to ask us to bring a different plant. And indigo was one of them. And at that time, I think there is this seeding in my mind, how from green leaves you can make a blue color. This was a beginning and my long journey to indigo.
That's fascinating. That leads me to the next question about this idea of memory, of archive and libraries. You know, in the post-colonial period that we have been in trying to recover information, recover history, one of the things that we always know gets lost, knowledge is one of the first things that gets lost in a power grab. If we think in 2013 in Timbuktu, we know that those precious manuscripts were unfortunately destroyed. Yeah. So in this kind of situation of really feeling a bit of hopelessness, I think, recently I heard a cultural worker, an artist and an educator by the name of, a South African educator by the name of Rangwato Hlasane, who said something to me that was very, very hopeful. He said, "We are all libraries." And what this really meant for me was that if I could open up my mind, maybe I could access music, maybe I could access Ethiopian hair traditions, maybe I could access textile, and these would become my possible libraries to work from. And if any of you were here last year, we did a project around archives with Lemi Garioku, and where we were also thinking about how music could be a productive space for thinking about archive and our histories. So this image, I think, is quite fascinating. Just to give you a sense of how we can build our libraries, is an image that I showed you earlier. It's an image of Elena Tsui's father, taken in 1925, 1 week before the Prince of Wales was arriving. And what I think is quite fascinating is that embedded in the textile is the phrase, let's see, lean liberty is better than fat slavery. That's quite interesting because, you know, next week Nigeria is going to be welcoming the Prince of Wales, so maybe that's food for thought for you guys. But this idea of, you know, textile being a space of possible resistance. So, Aboubakar, for you, what have been the libraries that you have invented or found? Maybe they're people, maybe they're experiences, maybe they're actual textiles.
Yeah, from the time I heard about this green leaf making blue, it was already a lost tradition. So I would say the elders, my grandmother, my aunties, and my mom had some textile who they could show me how beautiful the textile was made before the synthetic dyes come out, because now at that time all the market was only selling synthetic dyes. And what I remember especially from my grandmother, that she used to commission specific person or for different, when there was different ceremony or when she need to heal someone, to bring those plants to dye the tunic or pants from those plants. Mm-hmm. And those garments was used to heal people, because we do believe that the medicinal property of those different plants, of course indigo was one of them, but I do remember when we used to collect wild turmeric roots to bring to dye when the young boy been circumcised, we will dye those tunic with this turmeric because they have this antiseptic purpose. Mm-hmm. And my library is especially, of course, I spent some time in library in Europe or in France learning about this lost tradition, how to especially technically make a fermented leaves vat. But I had someone very important in my life, a spiritual father called Yusuf Tata Sissé. He's the one who really introduced me to this world of talking about the colonial period, when he used to take those French ethnologists on the field to discover a different cultural group like the Dogon. And so I think I've learned a lot through him, and what was this medium I'm using now. And what I've learned most is that it was much more than the medium.
Hmm. So did you do field research, or did you go on trips with this gentleman as well?
I did travel a lot. I've been in Guinea, because also I'm partly originated from Guinea, Mali, Gambia, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso. And of course, on those long journeys, I always exchange with elders to understand a little bit more about this lost memory of
well, that's incredible, because if any of you were at the talk earlier, Professor Chike Anyakor was talking about this. As students in university, one of the most important things for themselves in terms of finding a language for the practices that they were operating in, they had to do field research, and they had to go into the indigenous communities or their communities to figure out what would actually be inspiring. And for him, it was finding metaphors to write about exhibition making and so forth. So can you explain a little bit about what's happening in this slide? Because there is the Hunters Guild, right? And there's also a strong relationship to the trees and so forth, and what the Hunters Guild is, their role within Malian society.
Yeah, the Hunters Guild are a very important one in terms of initiatic society, and everybody is welcome to this society. It's not only men's society; it's both men and women. Anybody who feel comfortable with their philosophy of how to have the best relationship with Mother Nature, and to not act as destructing and oppressing the nature. And yes, this color I'm wearing here, I used to before knowing what was happening, because in the Hunters Guild, what I have to say when we hear hunters, it's not people who kill animals only. You know, they have a very different approach to the nature, how to respect nature. And one of the saying is in Bamanan we said Nimbeni. Nimbeni means that every life equal. There is no life better than another life, and there is no life older than another life. It's not only about human being. Animals need the same respect, and also the plants and tree, of course, is also living beings, and we need to respect. And we will never ever cut a tree traditionally before doing a specific ceremony of giving apologies, because we are taking the tree's life to like make a drum or something like that, and this is something very important. And I think in my journey, when I was child, learning about medicinal plant, I think I was much more interested in the plant because I was giving color more than their therapeutic purpose. Even, of course, this is a very important aspect for me as well. And this tree bark called mpeku, and is giving this beautiful red, is most of the time used traditionally by hunters as also a color, like a color of the blood. We call that nyama is a vital force, for example, of those animals when they hunt them and when they kill them, for example, they are taking their vital force.
Vitality.
Vitality. And I did not know much about that. And the thing is, when nowadays all those colors became kind of trendy, and people are collecting the bark from the tree. At the end, the bark is a tree's protection, and if you collect too much, you fragilize the tree, and then most of the time you kill the tree. Mm-hmm. This is something I've stopped doing for many years now. Of course, it's a beautiful color, but I always have to keep in mind that it's not only about beauty, and that you have to be thoughtful and mindful about what you are taking from Mother Nature, how to be respectful, and So
you said ni beni, right? Ni beni. And it's something that is. Do you think that informs your artistic practice?
It informed my childhood, my artistic practice, of course. And I do remember, for example, when we used to go in those journeys of taking animals, and if we came to find a wild tree full of wild fruit, for example, and it was very clear that we was only going to take what we need to sustain ourselves. It was not about bringing a basket and collecting all those, because we was saying always, okay, if you sustain yourself, and the birds can come and eat the fruits, and or other animal or someone else who can come from a long way and who will need to have something to sustain himself, and you always have to have that in mind. I think, yes, that was a very important...
So it's kind of interesting then, saying that in this sort of indigenous way of living, there's actually an idea of sustainability, an idea of relationship with your environment.
Of respect.
That's fantastic. And so can you talk to us a little bit about color as a conceptual space? Because there's obviously... Well, I'll let you do it.
Yeah, so, and because we always have in mind when we think indigo that is a very dark midnight blue shades. And in this tradition, in this belief, indigo is, I was saying, much more than a color, is many different shades. You can see this palette, or those shades of 12 different shades. And those 12 different shades took me, what I have to say, to be able to work, to create those 12 different shades, it took me more than 15 years to just understand my medium. So, and Because
Can I interrupt a little bit? Is that because the process was that you're literally self-taught? You've been teaching yourself?
Yeah, this is because it took me a long time to just understand that growing bacteria, and if I give to the bacteria all their needs, and they will give me what I'm expecting from them, those beauty, it's coming from the very pale shade of blue till the very dark one, and we call that from the blue of nothingness to the divine profound sky. And each of them have a specific emotion traditionally. And I remember what my spiritual father was saying, that the skillful indigo dyer will always ask their client to look in the sky any time of the day to show them a color, a blue color they can reproduce for their client. And I think this poetry was really amazing to me. And of course, in this palette, you can see there is, of course, darker one, but the light shades are much more challenging to achieve than the darker ones.
Is this the one that's called a bagafu?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the blue doesn't exist yet. We call that the blue of nothingness. That's like on the scarf here. This is a much challenging one.
So if there are any graphic designers that are using RAL or Pantone, you just heard what is it, the Milanese version. So the next thing that I would like to speak to you about is this idea that, well, actually, you know, we were speaking about Rothko as being one of the artists that has inspired you. But can you tell us about your Malian influences? Because I think one of the things that's so interesting about indigo is that it really feels like a metaphor for life, actually. It's a metaphor for relationality, of being in relation. Because although it might sound really strange, he's talking about bacteria, we're a few slides later into it, you'll start to really understand what that actually means.
Mm-hmm. And yes, I've been told once by an elder Dogon woman doing my research, saying, you know, my son, making indigo is a respect for life, because you have to keep as long as you can those life. And it seems very crazy or strange when you are talking about bacteria. And but making indigo is growing bacteria, because you have to collect those organic matters and let them ferment minimum 1 week, 10 days before you get the color coming from because there is nothing really obvious that green leaves is going to give you a blue color. And through the fermentation process, the enzyme, you will create bacteria. And those bacteria are the component when you hear indigo, indigotin. And when those bacteria react with oxygen, they turn solid and blue. That's indigo. And because you are dealing with a living organism, those bacteria, they have also, of course, a specific diet. You know, because anytime you dip your fabric inside the indigo vat, the fiber will absorb those bacteria and will get blue through the oxidation process. And those living bacteria, because you are taking their life when you dip the fabric in, they come inside the fabric. At the end of the day, you have to feed them, and their diet is you can give them any cereal bran porridge. You can feed them with honey or crushed date powder or even crushed banana, because and then let them rest 1-2 days to give them the time to regenerate. And traditionally, we said that everything we live will, of course, die. And the life cycle of those bacteria is that's also the parallel we do with human gestation. We said that normally we can keep, if you are skillful indigo dyer, you can keep your indigo vat about 9 months, you know. And of course now with my experience of over 30 years, it happened then I can keep some of my vats 14 months. And at the end of their life cycle, this is the time you can get this amazing shade I call the bagafu, the blue of nothingness. Because when the bacteria get older, they get tired and at that time they can achieve those pale, very pale shades of blue.
So really, the colors that you're actually able to produce are a result of the care that you've been showing.
It's a living blue, yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I have a question. In this process of self-learning, in this process of doing something like so committed, how has failure, what role has failure played? You know, in this idea of, I'm sure, did you have any vats dying on you? And how did that feel? I mean, how did you get through that process?
Yeah, I did kill so many bacteria in my life. I'm sorry, it seems being a bit criminal. But yeah, you know, it's a very sensitive environment. It's impossible, for example, to grow bacteria with using tap water because they are treated with bleach and many chemicals.
Fluoride and so forth.
And you need to have a very pure water environment with almost a neutral pH, you know, not too acidic because the bacteria are super sensitive and they cannot grow in a polluted environment. And I had to learn also, it's not only about this water, the temperature of the vat is very important. And there is some instrument we don't have traditionally, for example, to check the pH. And for that, you have to use your sense. You have to taste your vat, being sure that the alkali is, the vat is well balanced with the alkali. You have also to be able to observe, for example, we can see on those pictures, those foam on the top of the indigo vat, we call indigo flower, who will indicate you how healthy is your bacteria. There is the smell, and there is many sense you have to use to be able to understand this is something you will forge on many years experience. It's not something you just wake up and say, okay, I'm going to set up an indigo vat and make color. Of course, I could go to any art supplier and buy my colors and use them in my painting or in my artwork, but my interest is more how to understand this natural environment and how to, to collaborate with that natural environment to have this understanding to be able to do my artwork or in my art process or practice.
Well, you've just set me up perfectly for my next question, which is, Aboubakar and myself share a certain love, which is Japan. I lived there for 10 years, and he came quite early in his artistic practice. I think it was the early 2000s on a residency there. And for me, this is very emblematic of what is typical with craftsmen in Japan, is that they have such training and such skill around their instruments, the way that they make something. To give you an example, I went one time to a knife-making factory, or not a factory, but let's say it's a craftsman studio. And the machine that they were using to pound the metal was all with their foot. And then the second is that the fire, they're looking at the fires as it's going into as it's heating up the metal. And they could actually tell based on the color of the flame, the impurity level. And that's how they're doing the whole process. There's absolutely no mechanical machines, no temperature checks, no thermometers, none of those things. So what Aboubakar is just telling you is that actually through this whole process, you have to develop a skill set that allows you to understand the thing that you're dealing with. Like, for example, I think it's like the color of the vat, the sheen of the vat is also an indicator of the health of the vat. How long did it take you to sort of get this kind of like base knowledge of understanding how to work with indigo?
Oh, I would say, easily 12 years to just understand my medium.
What kept you committed? How did you keep going?
Yeah, when you are, passion, when it become at certain level of excess, it become craziness. So I think I'm in the middle of this craziness. And I really wanted to, to understand and what I'm sure about, but going there is not is a lifetime commitment for me,
That's amazing. So tell me, the well, we'll just go through these ones. But tell me, what was it that so inspired you about spending time in Japan?
I knew about few things. Of course, indigo is a universal color, but my interest to Japan was because I met this man in Paris, and it was the first time a Japanese master was coming in Europe to set up a fermented leaves vat, indigo vat. And through my exchange with him, and I went to this workshop with him, who was like almost 30 persons, and I was really disappointed and frustrated about the fact that everybody have to fight to just be able to dip their small piece of textile inside the vat. And I was completely away from what was happening, and he just noticed and asked the translator, why this gentleman is not struggling like the others to dip his fabric. And I just came to him saying that, okay, from what I know about indigo, this is just not respectful, and I don't understand that. And he agreed with me, because I think we have something in common also with Japan. In my own belief, in animism belief and Shinto is exactly the same things. And when he asked me to bring some of my work to show him, and the next day what I did, and they look at everything and say, oh, okay, not too bad. That was, I understood that it was, quite well. But, he had more than 40-year experience with indigo. And at the end of this situation, I was the only one invited in Japan to be able to share something. We had this common passion. And that's how I found myself in Japan. And also, I knew everything I was trying to keep alive as lost memory in my home in Mali was a living art in Japan, because they have this something I found really amazing. Even there is this paradox how high technology can be next to the tradition, and I think I like that notion of in any discipline keeping those traditions alive. And in terms of artisanship or craftsmanship, when some people come at a certain level of their knowledge, the emperor family give them this distinction of being a national living treasure. And that's something who really was, amazing to me. That was my interest for this, experience sharing with this master in Japan.
Yeah, because actually in Japan it really shows a deep commitment and understanding of what culture actually is for a society, and how that actually manifests through crafts. So the government actually has policy around this, where it's called the intangible cultural property. And the master craftsmen, and they're not many, there's maybe like 100, they're working in all kinds of different fields. Maybe it's textile, maybe it's a specific type of textile, like hemp, or exactly.
Many different.
They become designated, because of the knowledge that they possess, they become designated living heritages. Yeah. And what the government actually does is gives money towards them to be able to do workshops and so forth, so that there is some kind of transmission of their knowledge to other people. Yes, that's absolutely something like very, very important for us to be thinking about, is not only about building knowledge, but also how do we actually transmit this knowledge. So this image I just found recently on your Instagram account, which really sparked something for me, because in my research for the talk program, one of the things that I learned about what was happening in the 60s in Nigeria was that there was a kind of cross-pollination between, for example, writers and architects, and I'm thinking of, I'm actually thinking specifically of Wole Soyinka. When he was doing his theater production, he actually asked Dema Sonwoko to do the set design. And so this is a project where you did the theater costumes. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, that was an opportunity I had. I'm not especially a fashion person. I'm a fiber addict. I'm a fiber artist or a textile artist. And this was friend came to me, and of course the things always for me is when I talk about my practice, it could be related to many things, because in my own language, I don't know any word who can say the word art. It's not the way or the Western sense of art or canon of art. And yes, for me, my work can be related to craft, it can be related to design or art. And personally, I don't have borders in between all this. I can be sometimes also fashion, fashion designer. I mean, it was not the case for this. And for this Ségou Fassa, this theater play, and it was obvious that it was a story in the 19th century in Ségou, talking about different gods. And at that time, it was obvious for me that I could not use any other textile than the traditional narrow band textile. And of course, I could not use any color than the color I was sourcing from nature. And it's been a very inspiring project, because I also had the opportunity to work with a very old man who passed away a long time ago now, who was a traditional tailor. And all those costumes been completely hand-stitched, all of them, with traditional narrow bands, and all the color been used was also natural dyes. So this was a very learning process for me, and also an amazing opportunity to express a certain skill or through that costume, the making of those costumes.
You touched on something that we spoke about a little bit. I said it in passing to you. Remember the Chris Marker film, which is actually the departure point for one of the conversations that we're having tomorrow around collecting, which is statues. Statues also die. Mm-hmm. What's really fascinating in this film is that you realize historically, when Aboubakar says that there was no thing called art, it was because art was absolutely integrated in daily life. It means that from my hair to my clothes to how I move through the world and the objects that I had. I think one of the things that you're doing on your farm is that you have gourds, right?
Yeah.
And this whole thing about aesthetics, but living with something beautiful, but that's something that's sustainable.
Yeah. And something functional as well.
Yes, so I think that you've actually collapsed the borders between all of these different ideas of disciplinary practice, and keeping art outside. In fact, you're doing something that the Japanese do very well, which is living with art every day.
Yeah, artists cannot be disconnected with, day-to-day life. And for me, the expressions are diverse and multiple. And I would say, when my mom make an amazing meal, and I'm amazed by the taste of saying, wow, for me that's, flavor design. And when she think that we need to chase the bad spirit from the house, and she make different plants together and burn as incense. And I say, that's an amazing smell, and this is a fragrance design. I mean, I would say, art is, everywhere, and this notion is very important. And what I'm doing now in Mali, I mean, this project I have, I would call that my life project, is talking about sustainability. For example, those gourds was the recipient we was always using. Now they are replaced by plastic. But also even when they're broken, there was always someone to restitch them using a corn husk to make them waterproof, because object can be, hurt and then repaired. And that notion is really important. And when we saw those objects, they are really a piece of art as well. I mean, we have maybe to redefine what art is.
That's inspiring. So I have to be honest, Aboubakar, you look like such a sage. I never thought that you could be so radical. But in my research and sort of thinking about some of the things that you're actually processing and informs your practice, you've told me that Gandhi is somebody that inspires you. Can you tell us a little bit about why Gandhi is somebody that's important for you?
I think this is, when we look at this picture with what Gandhi, they call in India, the charkha, this spinning wheel. And this spinning wheel is the symbol was used in Indian flag. And that's mean a lot for me. And Gandhi did something amazing. And I have to start from where I'm coming from. I was born in Mali, and I'm from a cultural group with Soninke, and I'm coming from a lineage. And when you see today that Mali is the first producer of cotton in all African continent, and then that more than 90, maybe 7% of that cotton is exported to be transformed and come back in Africa as dumped used clothes from a Western country. So that Gandhi did was really amazing, and I can still see those pictures. He decided to boycott the English textile industry, and I can see those images that all the Indians are bringing there. He completely removed his suit, and they make pile of all this, and they burn them all. And he had this. This is a man who had a vision for his country, saying that they can make it happen. Any man can spin, and they can weave to dress themselves. They did not need to be only the consumer of the English service, the colonial power. And this is something fascinating for me, that this man had this vision. I would have loved to see something like that. And it's not only about textile. When you go in many of the African market, you can see those used everything, electronics, of course, fabric is my field, but shoes, bags, everything is like Africa is the dustbin of rubbish of, So this is something, of course, I'm sensitive, and especially knowing in my field that all those textile industry, traditional textile industry in Africa was very vivid, and we completely abandoned all those tradition to just be consumer. And what I want to say that I don't want to be, spectator of my own destiny. I would like to be actor more than spectator. So this is because, I'm producing, or I'm working as a cottage industry with villages for the elders, the women who still have the skill of hand spinning, and giving those bobbins you can see here to the traditional weaver who can still make the narrow bands. And those narrow bands, I'm using them as my art support. What I'm wearing is my own hand stitching garments, and I can, so I'm even calling that haute couture. I do believe in that,
So I've just recently had the epiphany that Aboubakar's, his magnum opus really is actually a project that he's been developing in Mali. About 3 years ago, he bought a piece of land, a tract of land, to make a farm. And he calls it a permaculture. And probably the best way to find out about this project is by looking on Instagram, because there is a lot of information there. So, Aboubakar, can you tell us a little bit about what the vision is for this? We're calling it a farm, but I think it needs another name.
Yeah, the name is just a piece of artwork for me. This is gonna be the biggest, how can I say, body of work of my life. And from everything I did explain before, and I'm working with different community, women community, because the land is between two villages, and I want them to reappropriate them the growing again indigo, and processing the indigo by extracting the pigment, because indigo is both pigment and dye, and making the compost, indigo compost for the dyeing the balls, and having a dyeing studio, and maybe have all these different actors of the textile chain, spinning until the final. But this is not only about indigo, of course. I have this small story to tell, because one day I arrived on my land before I start fencing everything. It's quite a big portion of land, and because those rural zones, people think that the nature is a common goods and everybody can take from it. I bought the land, and I wanted, because it was with lots of trees. And one day I came and I saw a woman with a guy with this machine, I don't know how to call it, cutting a big tree on my land. And I was like just mad that day, and I could even, not kill, but I mean, I was
Shocking.
really mad. And I told her, this tree is almost 70 years old. Even if you replant it, you will never live long enough to see that tree like this. And she said, yeah, I understand, I'm sorry, but, I have kids, and I need to. So, of course, it will be very easy to just get mad. But I thought that was a big lesson for me, that I have to propose something, it was. And this is a project I started with them, is working in a kind of a sensibilization, how to, to be in harmony with this environment and not be harmful to. And of course, proposing them a solution is giving them work in the farm, and and we are working as well in the food security. We are planting a lot. We started by healing the land, because the land been really damaged. We started by healing the land three years ago by reforesting, using many different essence of trees natives from the area, and growing vegetables. And our main goal is also raising animal and being able to use those animal, as for fertilizer. Yeah, I mean, this is something I think, for me, I did start something. When I say it's gonna be my biggest body of artwork, is yes, I won't be there to see the end of that, but I feel a mission of starting something, and I will never see the end. But for me, that's very important to be able to.
Well, it's quite amazing that you're already thinking about leaving something for those that are to come, because for me it sort of connects back to this idea of also being in Japan. In Japan they're doing it on a state level, but you as one individual are thinking about, how do you do this? How do you create an ecosystem that's about treating the land in a certain way, rehabilitating the land, reforesting the land, which is also dealing with things like climate change, which I think is quite impactful. I am excited to see what the next step is. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to watch a movie. So we'll just start that. And could I just get a quick time check? Where are we at on our time? 5 minutes to Q&A? Okay. So I guess we'll play this. This is 7 minutes. We're going to go a little bit late, I think.
Le souvenir d'enfance que j'ai, c'est ça. C'est d'être avec les animaux, les chèvres, les moutons, et puis nous, on cueillir les feuilles, les fruits sauvages pour se nourrir, et déterrer des racines pour se nourrir. Et voilà, et puis tout le monde y trouve son compte, aussi bien les animaux qu'on amène pour nourrir que nous-mêmes, quoi. Donc, et puis c'est la contemplation de la nature, c'est le chant des oiseaux. Ça, c'est nourrissant, ça, c'est inspirant. Je trouve que c'est la source d'inspiration la plus réelle pour moi, la plus juste en fait, la nature. To wala, min do wala jibu.
Awo jibu lo mawon.
Ma baba utere.
Ko jiba jibe ni
Jiba la. Jibe fan fana. Abulu be. Mon nous do bute la to yin wakati. Ayo sigi jam kelen ni ma. Amta. Bele jam la.
Amaru. Bargo mana mai? Datukula mai. Amana re.
Barafu, Barafolo, Baranonokene, Barakene, Baraje, Barafin, Barakale, Barajalan, Lomassa, Lomassa Dje, Lomassa Fin, Lomassa Douné.
That was for Documenta, the commissioned work that Aboubakar did for Athens and Kassel, and also connecting him to Bamako. Did you want to just offer a few words on the film, because it's something that you wanted to do for a long time, and this was the occasion for it? So maybe could you just speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it was, of course, a very important thing for me to talk one day about, when through my medium, I have to say that indigo is not anything trendy or fashionable, and I'm always about to talk about the different depth of indigo. There is a social depth, there is a spiritual depth, there is a political depth, there is many different depths of that's why I'm always saying that is much more than a color. So, and the documenta here gave me the opportunity to express two of them, one titled Africa Blessing, and it was a very controversial project. And but of course, controversy is always interesting. And Africa Blessing was about a collaboration with 54 living beings, animals. I did collaborate with to make this body of work. And as I'm saying always, art is not especially something you take to bring in a gallery space or in a museum, And Africa Blessing was 50. It was talking about migration, human movement, how, from what we know, I think all those West African countries know what's happening with those migrants trying to cross fearless the sea to go to Europe, what's happening in Libya. And I'm also migrant. At 10 years old, I've been sent to France. So, but I did not choose that migration. So, but I cannot be insensitive to what's happening, this tragic situation. And Africa Blessing, 54 sheep, 1 sheep per country in Africa. And because indigo, in our belief, in our tradition, is a color of protection, is a celestial color, is the color who links the human being to the divine. And there is many things we can say spiritually about, So it was not only about blue animals. And I have to say, for animal lover, I did not harm those animals. That was a part of the controversy. I have my hand in my indigo vat all the time. It's an antiseptic and anti-inflammatory. And I think that it was important, and because that was a perfect opportunity to talk about human movement. And for me, it was obvious that I would be really disrespectful to work with dead sheep skin. It was not about that. I wanted to really have this interaction with those living beings. It was very, very tough, but we get there. And I can even say that I'm the one who's been blessed by those animals. And Africa Blessing is to say something. When I was talking about my childhood as a shepherd, I knew very well all those animals we was taking to feed. And it was, we could go everywhere we wanted because we had space. And shepherd now in Bamako, I can see, or even in they cannot go where they want because all the space been fenced. And what I wanted to say through that human movement, I'm doing the parallel, and I can say nowadays this situation, any Westerner who want to come to Africa, it's easy to get visa to come to Africa, but in the other way, African doesn't have any legitimacy or freedom to go where they want to go. And the Africa Blessing was talking about that. And then you have in Castle Uprising. Uprising is another way. I mean, another something I wanted to express when I said indigo is not any fashionable or trendy color, because indigo is related to African slavery. And in the United States, it was indigo because it was the main cash crop. The colonists and the slave master did justify the fact that they can bring slave, and capitalism also was built in that. And human being exploiting other human being with no salary. And there is some part of the United States, like South Carolina, there was more slaves than So it's just to say that indigo was the main cash crop far before rice, sugarcane, tobacco, and cotton. So this is something I cannot work with this medium without having in mind, all those different depths. So.
Well, thank you very much, Aboubakar. So just before we, in closing comment, it's kind of amazing that you talked about slavery in the U.S., because I wasn't thinking about it when I chose this American sociologist and historian, W.E.B. Du Bois. So I have a closing quote for you from this book. At the end of our striving to be co-workers in the kingdom of culture, to escape both death and isolation, to husband and use our best powers and our latest genius. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I think it was a fantastic talk. It was really inspiring and quite amazing. The question that I have is, you've sort of spoken a lot about a variety of things, and it does seem that working with indigo in the 21st century is getting harder and harder for a variety of reasons. I mean, we've spoken about climate change, the population explosion, pressures on land, competition for land, where we can actually grow these products. Because I think that's actually happened in Nigeria, where we used to have a lot of indigo growing, in the wild. But nowadays it's it's harder and harder to get hold of the indigo plant here in Nigeria. And also another thing, indigo cloth dyeing is very, very time consuming. Whereas, centuries ago, time was quite different from the way we use time today. So would you say that indigo cloth dyeing, from being something that was everyday and very, very natural, has now moved to becoming something that is just affordable to people who have money and for people who are looking for something unique? Are we now moving in that direction? I mean, I just don't think that there could be any way that we could sort of go back to the way people were handling and dealing with indigo, that it's going to be something sort of niche. And, you mentioned haute couture, is that what's going to happen? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. So the difficulty now is a lost tradition, not only in Africa. I can take the example also in India. India also had a huge indigo tradition. But, when we come to mass production, we always have such situation coming. And in terms of indigo species, there is about 800 species of plants who contain that component we call indigo tin. And from those 800 species, we can find 600 species in African continent. Indigo is still used traditionally as a medicinal plant, but the technology of processing indigo as a dye is completely lost because artisans just decided to go in the easy way of using synthetic dyes. The thing is, an artisan who's using synthetic dyes with hydrosulfate reduction, in one day it can make, I'm taking some example from even the Dogon country, because when I started my research, that was one of my fields. And I do remember the market day was every 5 days in villages. And the women could bring their wrap skirt to sell them. But in 1 week time, they would make maybe 3 or 4. But now, in one day, they can make 50 wrap skirts. And myself, taking those same wrap skirt, I can only make maybe 3 or 5, maximum 5 a day. So you see, that makes things very difficult. And also, I think the way people used to consume a wrap, for example, for a man having a boo-boo, like a rope, he will, even a very important person, he will have in his entire life maybe 3 or 5 boo-boo, because making embroidery will make more than a year to make, he could afford maybe in his entire life, maybe having, if he could have 5, would be the maximum. Now, how we consume, it makes things, in the way that, of course, it becomes something prestigious and because it's time consuming. The raw material itself, to be able to have 1 kilo of indigo dried balls, you need 10 kilo of fresh leaves. The indigo that I'm using for my work, there are 350 liters. It means anytime I'm setting a vat, I have to use minimum 20 kilo of dried balls. And these 20 kilo represent 200 kilos of fresh leaves. So you have to be able to harvest them and to make them. So this is those difficulty. I think our ruler, our government have this vision, for example, of like what we was talking about, so like in Japan, to be able to, to produce indigo in a bigger scale. Because for now it's really something precious and expensive, of course.
I was going to say, Aboubakar, didn't you mention to me that in the museum in Bamako there was the Telem fabric that was, how old was that fabric?
There are before 11th century textiles. It's a fragment of them. And
the quality of the fabric and the colors?
The color is like they've been dyed yesterday. If you look at them, it's just incredible.
So I guess that's the distinction. Do you want to throw away clothes, or do you want things that could last centuries?
Yeah.
So do we have another question?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I would like to ask, you spoke about how over a decade you have been working on your indigo hat. And I would like to ask, in this generation where we like to be made faster than we want to learn how to be made, I would like to ask that, relating it to this generation where colors are ready-made, where we can just get it to make our hat, what would you advise the painter who can easily get his paint? What dignifies the person making his paint himself, his pigment himself, from somebody who's just buying a ready-made that will make it classical, that will stand him apart from the rest?
Okay, this is part of my project, but I'm not there yet. In the way that, for example, indigo is both pigment and dye. And you have some place we produce indigo pigments, have been used for a long, long time, like India and Pakistan. And of course, it's ready to be used because they extract the pigment from the leaves. The reality is 1 kilo of indigo pigment is about $350 the kilo. And to get 1 kilo of this pigment, you need about 100 kilo of fresh leaves. So we are still coming in this same, we are not producing enough quantity of pure indigo pigment, but you can find it, but at that price.
I feel like right now, anything that is being preserved or that is going to live on in future is either being automated, industrialized, or computerized. And I'm just wondering if there's any place for actually preserving indigo as a tradition if we're not looking in that direction.
This is my hope always, to what I was saying about cotton, for example, because dyes are always linked with fibers. What I was saying that for me, it's important to have in mind that if we lost what our ancestors have been using, it's like we lost our soul. And how to not lost our soul? And everything I'm doing for many years now is really trying to keep alive this lost heritage, lost memory of some tradition. Of course, my medium is 100% traditional and sustainable. We were saying that indigo is 6,000 BC, and I'm still working in the way to produce the colors the same way, and even, of course, I'm using it's not really the word, a contemporary language in my work, but our ancestor was also contemporary because what they was doing it can be related to that contemporaneity. I don't know how to say. Contemporaneity, yeah. So, yes, this is the question I'm asking myself every single day: how we can save all this? Why our government are not having this vision about our craft, about the savoir-faire? Yeah, this is the key of this is a question. I don't have a specific answer to that, but I keep asking myself the question. But I'm also trying to be true with myself, from what I really feel inside me, and the way I should take to go ahead to bring it at another level. Yeah.
So thank you very much. On that note, we will be ending our session. I just want to make a comment because I think that what Aboubakar is also doing on social media is quite phenomenal. I think a lot of us are kind of a bit confused about what to project of ourselves and how to actually use it. And if you look, actually, his posts are very specific. They're very detailed. You can understand his practice, his ideas, the things that he's like, sometimes he's even giving people clapbacks for not recording or giving proper credit. And yes, what's quite interesting is also he has a really active comment box where there's actual conversations happening. So I think this is one way where you're trying to think about how to store this information and also how to think about how to share this information. He has a following of 20, almost 25,000 very active followers. So on that note, I would like to say, can you please help me and give this lovely gentleman a very big...
Thank you, Missla.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.